If it is important for a people to record and tell their stories, then a vital person in the telling of those stories is the first Black female reporter of the Miami Herald, B. L. Hines.
My name is Beatrice Loretta Johnson Hines. I was born in 1938, February 12th, in Williston, Florida, a rural country town in northwest Florida. My mother was born in Plant City, Florida. Her name was Ida Bell Lawton before she married my dad, who was Adam Johnson. My dad was born in Alabama, I'm not sure which city, and they migrated to Williston, Florida. He came with his parents, his mother and his stepfather, when he was like a teenager. And so he met my mother when she was about 17. They got married when she was 18. I was born when she was 19. It was so funny. My mother was so green, and she got married right out of her mother's house. She didn't even know when she got pregnant with me, her mother-in-law had to tell her what was wrong. She didn't even know because, a lot of the parents back in those days did not talk to their daughters. And all she knew was that she was getting married and she's going to have a husband, but she didn't know all the things that went along with it. And she told me she didn't even know she was pregnant until her mother-in-law told her that she was expecting me. She moved from Plant City to Williston with my dad, and that's when things started going bad for her. My dad worked. He was a laborer. He worked on if they were building roads and stuff like that. He would do that. He did that kind of construction work. My mother was a homemaker. She stayed at home and took care of us. I left there with my mother and my younger brother, whose name is Adam. We left there when my mother was only 24 years old, and she was escaping an abusive marriage. And the women in the neighborhood women are powerful. They just pulled together. My dad didn't know a thing. My mother kissed him goodbye that morning. All week long she had washed and ironed all of his clothes and had them hanging neatly in the closet. And that morning she fixed his breakfast as usual. And I sat on his lap as he drank his coffee, and I drank mine from the saucer. And when it was time for him to leave, my mother walked him to the door, kissed him goodbye. I can see it in my mind right now. And then she swirled around when she watched that truck turn the corner. And she swirled around and she got my brother out of bed, and Mud Deer, who was our very good friend, and we all call it, most people in the South have a Mud Deer. Tyler Perry did not invent that name. We just called all the women we loved Mud Deer. That was our Mud Deer. And she came over with her daughter, and they helped my mother they had already arranged for a man who drove a lumber truck to come by and pick us up. And I remember my mother got me dressed while my Mud Deer was taking care of my brother. And as soon as the truck came by, he took that big old steam trunk, and I think they call it a steamer, the big trunk. And he was a strong man. He slung that thing up on the back of that truck like it was nothing. He lifted me up and put me in the cab, and then he helped my brother up in the cab of the truck. And my Mud Deer gave my brother to my mom, and she sat him on her lap. And we went to the bus station. And that was goodbye Williston, Florida. I didn't see Williston again until I was 21 years old. So when we left Williston, we went first to live with an aunt and uncle in East Palatka, Florida. And I was 5 years old, and there was a one-room schoolhouse that was a few yards away from where we lived in the country, and that's where we attended school until my mother came and got us in April of 1944. And we left Williston in 1943. But in 1944, my mother came and got us. She had found a place for us to live in Miami, Florida. And when I came here, school had already started. So she wasn't allowed to register me in the public school. But there was a Wonderful little school across the street from where we lived, and it was Miss Powers' school. And it was a private school, and she took me in and took my brother in, and that's where I spent my first grade year in Miami at Mrs. Powers' school. And in the next year, I entered Douglas Elementary School, which is on 13th Street and right off 3rd Avenue. And I stayed there in the second and the third grade. And then in the fourth grade, I went to Phyllis Wheatley Elementary School because Douglas only went to the third grade at the time. And at the end of the summer, when I was in the fourth grade, my mother had by this time remarried, and we went to live in Texas. We thought we were going to be there forever. But my mother didn't like the weather. And so my stepdad had bought her a cute little house, and we had a wonderful year in Texas, my brother and I. He was a good man. And then we came back to Miami because she didn't like the weather. The year we were there was a flood, a tornado, and very cold winter. And my mother was a Florida girl. She couldn't deal with all that. She got tired of slipping down on the road as she was trying to go to work, take her bus to work. She couldn't deal with that anymore. As soon as summertime came, we were back to Miami. We were headed back to Miami. And so we lived in Liberty City, and I attended Liberty City Elementary, where I first met Congresswoman Frederica Wilson and her brother Thurley. Thurley and I were best friends. Thurley eventually became the first black reporter at the Miami Herald. I was the first black woman reporter, but Thurley was the first black reporter. Frederica was in the third grade, I believe, and she wore big, pretty, her mama dressed her so cute, and I remember the big hair bows that she used to wear to school. And then I went to, in the seventh grade, I went to Booker T. Thurley stayed at Dorsey and graduated later from Northwestern. But I went to Booker T with several of my friends. I had always had a dream of going to Booker T when I was in elementary school. And so I was able to go there. My mother allowed me to go. We would buy a bus pass that lasted a week, and it was 80 cents. And that's how the bus driver would click it each time we used it, we got on the bus. In 1950, I started the seventh grade at Booker T. Washington High School. And that same year, we had a bad hurricane in Miami. That same year, there was a bad hurricane. And I remember I was so excited about being a student at Booker T. Washington High School. School was closed, and after the hurricane, I got dressed and I was ready to go, and the kids were laughing at me. There's no school. And I was so sad because I was so excited about being a student at Booker T. Washington High School. And that was in October, and I didn't want to miss any days. Would tell, if I was sick, I wouldn't even let my mother know because I didn't want her to say, you can't go to school today because you're sick. I wanted to be in school. I just loved going to Booker T. Washington High School. Prof was always nominated for something as a top principal because he was so good. My principal, my own high school principal, Charles Williams, they were top-notch principals. They were educated people who knew that things were going to change, and even if they didn't change, they wanted us to have a knowledge of our culture, and they wanted us to have a knowledge of music and the arts and everything, science. They were principals who pushed us to be, even when there was no hope in sight, they pushed us to have careers that some of us went on to have. I had a journalism teacher who pushed me to write and threatened one time if I didn't come downstairs and write an essay that she could put in a contest. And I said to myself, I'm not going to do that. I was in the art room. I love to draw. I didn't want to stop what I was doing to go in her journalism class to write an essay. and she threatened to come to me with a belt. So I put my brushes down and I went downstairs and I wrote the essay and I won. But that's what they did. They pushed us to do stuff that we thought we couldn't do. It was beyond our boundaries, and we did it. So I have in my classmates, I had one guy who was such a mathematician. He was wonderful. He passed on, but he was so good. He really should have been teaching college people you know, but he was teaching high school students. But we needed him there too. When I was going to school, it was one of the big three we called ourselves, the big three high schools. It was Booker T. Washington, um, Dorsey at that time, which later became Northwestern, and Carver, George Washington Carver. And we competed in everything. We competed in sports. We competed in music. Our bands and our choruses competed against each other. And we used to have the big. They would come from when we had our choral contests, competitions. The young people would come from West Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, and we would always have a competition at Booker T. Washington because we had the biggest auditorium. And I can remember, I can't think of her name right now, but she was a soprano who went to Carver, a little round, dark-skinned girl, but could sing. My goodness. I remember one time she was singing an aria from, I don't remember what opera it was, but we had neighbor people would come in. They would pay to come in to see the competition. It was top class singing. And this man was so overcome by her singing that he ran out in tears out of the auditorium. I will never forget that. So that's the kind of education that our black children were getting in our black schools back then. And we lost a lot of that when schools became integrated. We lost a lot of the stuff that we were taught and our culture and our music. We lost a lot of it. And when I was a teenager, when I was growing up, we made it. It was like an outing to go dancing. I'm going dancing Saturday night, and so going dancing, we went to Mary Elizabeth or Sir John, but you could only get in there if you were over 18. And I would go with my college friends sometimes, and I would be dancing, and the bouncer would come and tap me on the shoulder and I had to leave, and then I would go around and come in another door. And it was just, we just made a game out of it. It was fun. But then all that was gone. And on Sunday afternoons, the Mary Elizabeth would have a little jazz jam session, and they would allow teenagers to come. They didn't sell any alcohol. And so we would come on, it would be like around 4 o'clock. And my friends and I would go over. That's where I first saw pianist Hazel Scott, and she was married to the late great Adam Clayton Powell, who I was the last reporter to see him before he died. And he died right at Jackson Memorial Hospital. But he and Hazel were divorced then. But Adam Clayton Powell liked dark-skinned women, and he looked white. But his wives were all dark, and the woman he was with when he died was as dark as I am, very pretty black woman. And Hazel Scott was gorgeous. It was during the height also of the civil rights movement, and before they started moving out in the early 50s and the mid 50s, we used to have what we called in every February a month of forums. And that's where people like Dr. Martin Luther King would come to speak, Thurgood Marshall came to speak, and they would have them in all the schools in the county, in the high schools. Our choirs would take turns singing. And back then, I don't know what the schools are doing now, but we did hard stuff. I mean, we did arias from operas and, I mean, classicals. And so we would compete, the high school choruses would compete. And whatever chorus was singing that Sunday, we would try to get all of our students out and fill the church up. And people would dress up and they would come to these forums and they would hear these great speeches and telling us to hang on and what we had to do to become equal. It was just amazing. At that time, Dr. Martin Luther King used to come, and he also used to visit the Hampton House. The Hampton House was also a little jumping place, but it was miles away from Overtown. It was in the Brownsville area. graduated from Booker T in 1956. I had a scholarship in voice to Knoxville College, which my mother did not let me take, and that's a long story. She thought that if I thought I was going to be a singer, I might not get a job. So she didn't encourage it, and she thought if we waited a year and I would get it out of my system, and then I could go back to I'd go to school later. But I never did. I decided I was so disheartened when she wouldn't let me take the scholarship. The next year, I got married. I was 19, I got married. When I got married, we had the wedding at our little apartment where my mother lived with my brother and I. And we rented the chairs from the Range Funeral Home. And they were scattered in the yard. And on the back of the chairs, it says Range Funeral Home. It was at my wedding. And then after the wedding and after the reception, that night, the after party, we went to the Hampton House. And we finished the celebration of my wedding at the Hampton House. We knew that things were going to change. They had already started relocating black people from over town. This was in around 1957. I was out of high school already. So around 1957, the word was out. People knew that that the highway was coming. And a lot of the churches, the people who attended the churches had to relocate. So churches like Ebenezer United Methodist Church was relocated on 36th Street. It's still there. But the church that I attended as a child, when we came to Miami in 1944, it was a wood structure. And when I was 9 years old, the building that's there now, which is now a community cultural arts center on 10th Street and 3rd Avenue, it was Ebenezer United Methodist Church, and I used to attend that church as a child. My mother sang in the choir there. But when I was 9 years old, they laid the cornerstone for that church. I remember it was a very cold day. It was the same year, the next year, we moved to Texas. But that year was very cold, and it was either January or February when they laid the cornerstone. It was a big ceremony, and lots of people were there standing around as the cornerstone for the new church was laid. And the pastor's name was W.O. Bartley, and he was well loved, not only by the black community. When they were building that church, there was a white bus driver on the 21 route who used to sell peanuts on his bus to help build that church that's there on 3rd Avenue and 10th Street now. And I'm glad they didn't tear the building down, because after the church moved, another church moved in, and it never, in fact, the funeral for my husband was held at that church. And I'm not sure, I've been there since then. All that was gone. Some of the major churches hung on, like Mount Zion on 9th Street. They hung on to the bitter end, and it's still there. I think they're undergoing some renovation now. Another church was Bethel AME on 8th Street. It hung in there. Sometimes it would be just a handful of people, but they hung on to those churches. Now St. John is being refurbished, or whatever you call it, on 3rd Avenue and 13th Street. And St. Agnes hung in there, St. Agnes Episcopal Church. And when my friend, the late Richard Berry, was the priest there, he built that church back up. He made it alive again. And I hope they keep it alive. I'm not sure what's going on there now because I haven't been there for a while. And when I was 20, I became a mother. My first son, James Frederick Hines, Jr. In the heyday, in the 40s and the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, early 50s, the St. John the Sir John and the Lord Calvert and all those hotels, they were just so popular because that's where the black entertainers had to live when they came to perform in clubs on Miami Beach. So, but anyway, when the highway came, integration of some of the hotels came about the same time. Black people could go live on Miami Beach, in some of the hotels. And so our hotels began to go down. They were not, frequented like they used to be. And so they became like, the town, Overtown became almost like a ghost town. Uh, we used to go, when I was a little girl, my mother used to take us to dinner at Odell's restaurant in Overtown. It was on, I believe it was on either 5th or 6th Street on the corner. I think it was 6th Street on the southeast corner, the northeast corner of the street. And it was a beautiful restaurant. It had carpeted floors, and the waitresses all looked so pretty with their pretty handkerchiefs in their pockets, and it was, we dressed up to go there. And so all of that stuff died. And I remember when I was going to the hospital to have my second son, and we had to drive over. The road was all torn up to Miami, to Mount Sinai Hospital, and that's when I realized that Overtown was never going to be the same anymore. It was already a ghost town. It started to go down around 1957, 58. And by 1961, a lot of the people had moved out. They sold their property. They got pennies for it, and some of the properties are still there. The hotels were torn down. Gwen Cherry's family, the late Gwen Cherry's family owned, I believe it was the Mary Elizabeth Hotel that they owned, and it was a nice hotel. They had good dance floors. And by the time I was 24, I was a widow. I had two little boys, and my husband had been killed in a ballroom fight. He was a new rookie cop, and he got killed one night in a bar fight. I worked as a maid after my husband was killed. I worked as a maid to help support. I lived with my mother to help support my children and myself, and I split everything with my mother. I didn't want her to be responsible for having to take care of me. It was like we were roommates, and so I paid half of everything. I did all the laundry. I did her laundry and my laundry, and at that time we didn't even have a washing machine, so I would wash the clothes in the bathtub on a scrub board on my knees, which is probably why I can't walk hardly today. We did not have that many. I don't remember any marches in Miami, but we did have sit-ins at the dime stores, at McCrory's and Cress's. They had lunch counters there. And so what we would do is the young people would go in and sit at the lunch counters, and of course they would turn all the lights out and not serve us and ask us to leave. I was not a part of that. By that time, I'm already a young mother. And my mother didn't want me protesting. She would not keep my child to protest. So, but when I was a maid, the way I protested was I didn't get the identification card because I wanted them to stop me and ask me for my card so I could tell them why I don't have one. But nobody ever stopped me. But that was a requirement to work on Miami Beach. You had to have an ID card if you were black. I worked for two families. At first, I was doing day work, which meant I did a day here and a day there, and people were so unkind. And I was a young woman, and I would do major cleaning every day, which was very hard. I mean, moving furniture. And they expected you from 8 to 4 to general clean their homes and then wash and iron their clothes. And I remember one woman, I had worked so hard cleaning her blinds. The house was so dirty. And I did all that and washed all the clothes, and I didn't finish ironing. And she was so angry because I was a slave and I should have done everything that she wanted me to do. And then the way I left her is one day my baby was teething. Sean was the baby, and he was teething, and he was up all night with a fever. So I'm holding him. I didn't sleep at all. And I started to call her until I couldn't come in, but I didn't want to disappoint her because I knew she was dependent on me. So I was like an hour late getting there. I took a bus from my house all the way to Coral Gables. And I was living in Liberty City, which was not that easy because you had to change like 2 buses. So when I get there, she's angry because I'm late. And I said, I shouldn't have come in. I have a sick baby at home. I had to leave my sick baby with the babysitter because he's teething very hard. And I said, I didn't want to disappoint you. And she got embarrassed. I said, so that I came to work. And then she said to me, but at the end of the day, she fired me. And she said, I think her husband made her do it because he was there when I got there, but that particular morning he had already gone, and so he knew I was late. So she said, we have parties sometime. Would you like to come and would you serve? Would you come and serve a party? And I said, of course I will. I knew I wouldn't be coming back, but it was okay. But because that was a job that I didn't even like. That house was always so dirty, and she had two teenagers, and her husband liked his shirts ironed a certain way. And so I had to do all of that before I left to go home and take care of my babies. And so, but then I had another, I finally got a job with a family where I worked in one place for 4 days, and they had children. And then the other woman I worked for one day on a Monday, she was a career woman. She would leave, she worked for a very prominent real estate firm here in Miami. And she would say to me, Beatrice, you're just a girl. She always wanted me to think that I was not a grown up. Here I am. I'm taking care of two children. I'm a widow. I'm feeding them. I'm clothing them, and they always look cute. And she said, you're just a girl. And then she would leave a broken dish, a cracked dish, and a chipped cup and tarnished silverware for me to eat. Oh, that was what I had to use for my lunch. Well, I want you to know when she went to work, I used her good stuff. And I did that because I had to make myself feel good. If you aren't careful, people will put you down so that you will think that they are telling the truth and you would not know your own self-worth. And she would say to me, I want you to clean the bathroom last. And guess what? I cleaned it first. Because she probably thought I had some kind of disease, and I'm thinking maybe they got a disease. So I cleaned the bathroom first before I had to use it. And so she never knew that I knew what she was doing until years later. I'm a reporter now. And then I become the first black woman to be a columnist at the Miami Herald. And so they wrote this big article about me. The Miami Herald editor wrote this big article about me and how far I had come. And he mentioned those incidents in the story, but I never told him her name. But she recognized herself, and she called me, and she wanted to invite me and my mother to dinner, to lunch. And I'm so sorry that we never did that. We just never found the time to do it, and then she died. But the reason, I think she wanted to apologize. I think she wanted to say, I'm so sorry. Because this woman really thought she was a wonderful Christian woman. She would send part of her tithing to my church every month. And she paid me more than the woman who I worked 4 days a week. That woman paid me $8 a day, and this woman paid me $10 a day. So she really thought, she didn't know that she was racist. She really didn't. She was from Mississippi. It was the way she had been brought up. They didn't treat the black help like the white people. So she did the best she could, and I never hated her for it. I understood, being raised in the South, born in the South, you kind of understood. I appreciated that kind of racism much more than I appreciated the subtle racism, where people pretended that they, like you, and they really didn't. You knew it. You knew it. But that's what I did. I worked as a maid there. And then the lady who I worked for 4 years had two children at the time when I started, and then she had another child. And the two children, the two older children were like 4 and 6, or 4 and 5. And there was another woman who lived on, and I came in during the day. They were very wealthy, and the little boy always loved for us to hug him. And the little girl used to like to do it too, but then they started drawing back. And one day when I was trying to hug the little boy, he drew back and then he started crying. And I didn't understand what was going on. And so one night I was giving the little girl a bath before I left. And she was so pretty, and she had these long brown braids. and I was telling her how cute she was because she was so mean. She had turned like really a little mean child. And I was trying to pull it out of her, the kindness and the sweetness out of her again. And I said, "You're so pretty and you got such beautiful hair." And she said, "And you're ugly and you're black and you have ugly hair." And I said, "Okay." And then she had a birthmark on her tummy. And the birthmark was brown like me. And I said, "Oh my goodness, that birthmark looked like it's moving. It's getting bigger. I hope it doesn't cover your whole body because you'll be brown like me." And she was so upset and she told her mother. And I said that to her because I wanted her mother to question me. And then I wanted to know, why would you teach your children to hate somebody who is loving them? But she never did. What she said was, "Oh, don't worry. When you're old enough, I'm going to have that moved back with plastic surgery." And so she said that to me the next day, the little girl, when I was with her. And Mommy said, "I'm going to have this removed with the plastic surgeon is going to remove this mark." And I said, "But it's a birthmark. It probably will come back." But the mama never questioned me. She never did. But that year they went away. They went to Europe. And they didn't leave any provision for me. I didn't get a paid vacation. I had no sick leave. I worked many days sick. And she said, "Well, maybe you can find something while we're gone. This is the summertime. It's hard to find work in the summertime." So I said, I was so hurt. I was crushed because I'm wondering, what am I going to do now, Lord? But some of my friends who were maids also and who wanted to take time off during the summer with their families had me work in their place. So I survived the summer. But I was so hurt and upset the way she didn't care about me, and I was so loyal to her. I decided I wanted to find another job while she was away, but I didn't. And I'm a Christian, so I believe that God didn't want me to do evil for evil, because that was my motive. I was going to get her back, and the Lord wouldn't let me find a job. But when she came back, God instructed me, and I believe this with all my heart, how to go about just getting another job. And the way I did it was I asked her if I could have Wednesday off and I would work Saturday. And she was glad because she wanted her house shining on Saturday for the weekend. And so, but she didn't know that. See, back then, of course, there was no internet and you couldn't go on a computer and look for a job. So you had to do it either Monday through Friday. And the only way I could look for a job was to have a day off in the middle of the week. So I took Wednesday, and on Sundays, I would circle all the ads that said, "We are an equal opportunity employer." And at that time, the Miami Herald had a one ad section this thick, about an inch thick. And so I would sit down after I read the comics with my sons. I would circle all the ads that said, "We are an equal opportunity employer." This is 1965, and things are beginning to change because of Johnson and the new Civil Rights Amendment. And so one day I circled, one of the ads I circled was for a bank teller. And I had had some business training, so I thought I could do that. But they were just doing that. Many of the businesses would do that just because they had to, but they really didn't want to hire any black people. So this particular time I called this bank, and the young woman answered the phone, and I told who I was, and I said my name and my age, and I said I have had some business training, and she was so excited. They thought they had found a person, to fill that spot. And then she said, "But what high school did you graduate from?" And I said, "Booker T. Washington High School." Well, now back in those days, that was a black school. No white people went to that school. So she didn't know I was black until I said that. And she said, "Oh, well, can you wait just a minute? Let me get my supervisor." And he came to the phone and he said, "That job has been filled as of right now." Bam. And hung the phone up. So the next time I saw an ad that I thought I was qualified for was the ad from the Miami Herald. And it said they were looking for a file clerk, but they didn't have a phone number, so I couldn't call. They had a post office box, and I had to write a letter of application. And I think that was their way of finding out if I could write and spell or whatever. And so I didn't have a typewriter, but I took a lined sheet of paper and I placed a typewriter sheet on top so that my lines would be straight. And I have a nice, clear handwriting. So I took my time and I wrote a nice letter of application. Everything that I had learned from my 8th grade business teacher at Booker T. Washington, Miss Jane Lewis. I always call her name. She's dead now. But she taught us what to do, even though it didn't look like we would be able to use it, but she taught us, and I took it in. And I wrote, and they did not ask for a resume, but I sent one anyway because I wanted them to know that I knew what a resume was. And sure enough, I sent the letter on Monday, and by Wednesday, I got a call, Wednesday evening, I got a call asking me, could I come in on my next day off for an interview? And I did, and I was there all day. They took me all over the building and introduced me to everybody, and I was there for the whole day taking a test. And then they called me the next day, the next evening, and told me that I had the job if I wanted it. And it was going to be paying $60 a week. And that was $10 more a week than I was making as a maid at the time. And my son, my youngest son, had just turned 5, and he heard me tell my mom, I said, Mom, I got the job at the Miami Herald. I'll be a file clerk, and I'll be making $60 a week. And my little boy started jumping up and down. Oh, Mommy, we're rich, because he heard me say I'll be making $60 a week. I guess when you're 5 years old, $60 was like being rich, you know. And so then I asked him, this was in December of 1965. And the woman that I was working for was always telling me that maids were a dime a dozen and that she could always get somebody else. When I used to say to myself, but you won't get anybody like me, because I did everything. I would sew for her, and I cooked, and I did everything. And her house was sparkling clean. My mother taught us, whatever you do, do the best you can, do it to the best of your ability. And I took that in. I ironed her, nobody could iron her husband's shirts like me. That most people would leave cat faces. I don't know if y'all know what cat face is, but anyway, no cat faces. And the little girl, she would buy beautiful clothes for the little girl, but sometimes they would be too long. I would take them home with me, and I would hem them on my time with my family. And yet she would say maids were a dime a dozen. So when I went in that morning and I said, I wanted to talk to you. I want to talk to you. And she thought I was going to ask for a raise. What do you want? What do you want? I said, I just need to tell you something. And I said, I have another job, and I'm giving you a 2 weeks notice. Well, she flopped down in the nearest chair, and I think I saw tears in her eyes because she was not expecting that. And I told her, I said, I'm giving you a 2 weeks notice. She didn't do that for me. She left me stranded, but I gave her a 2 weeks notice, and I asked them if I could start on the first Monday at the Miami Herald, on the first Monday in January, which was 2 weeks later. So I got the job in 1965, but I didn't start till the first Monday in January in 1966.